Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Making Minds. The series so far has really focused on what's the definition of a mind. I've been pointing out there isn't necessarily a one-to-one mapping between a brain and a mind, and specifically if you take a collection of minds and allow them to interact, that collection of minds can be looked at as having a mind of its own. And I left the last episode with this fun thought experiment, which is if you take a person with a regular brain where the two hemispheres are highly connected, and then you cut them, then what would the experience be? Now I came up with a theory of what the answer would be, and then I actually found on the net an actual account of what actually happens. So I'll tell you my theory and how I came up with it, and then I'll explain, what it's actually like. Now, key to my theory is some very basic concepts out of distributed computing. That is one of the strengths that I have, a lot of experience in distributed systems. And one of the key things with distributed systems for both fault tolerance and for performance is making lots of copies of stuff. And I'll give you an example. Right now, my online education site uses Amazon S3, which is Amazon's storage system for storing files. So when a user gives me a file to my online system, I send it up to Amazon. Now Amazon doesn't keep just one copy of that file, because if that server went down, it wouldn't be able to give me the file anymore. So when you upload a file, it actually stores lots of copies on different servers, sometimes even in different geographic locations. And when somebody asks for that file, it actually just looks in one of the several servers to find out where there's a copy. And the brain seems to store memories in a very similar way. So when you remember something, you don't just store it in one small place, because if you had a stroke or those brain cells died, you would lose the memory. So basically, almost anything that you experience or remember, whether it's a piece of information or a memory of how to perform a particular action, you actually get lots of copies stored all over your brain. So the idea is, once again, is that if you lose part of your brain, it's not like you completely forget. It might take you longer to find the memory, or if you're really unlucky, you might have actually lost a copy of it. But the most common things, you're going to have lots of copies. So let's go back to the guy who's about to have the corpus callosum, I think they call it. So that person has life experiences. They from basic things like knowing what their name and their age is, to where they were born, to what their friends are, to what their family looks like, so on and so forth. And so there's going to be lots of copies of that information stored almost certainly in both hemispheres. And all those memories basically form the guy's personality, his history, his sense of identity, so on and so forth. So when you cut the brain in half, each part of that brain still has basically an almost full set of memories of the person. They'll have less copies of each one, and in some respects there might be a memory that's in one half but not the other. But in most cases there's actually going to be pretty good redundancy. Now on top of that, different hemispheres do have certain specializations. So one of the hemispheres is going to be able to articulate much better than the other. Apparently many times one hemisphere is not particularly good at grammar, for example, or not very good at adding emotional content. So what would happen is, leading up to the operation, there's this singular consciousness which is thinking, oh, I'm about to have the operation. Once the brain's split, each one of those hemispheres remembers most of the things leading up to the actual surgery. They'll have less copies, but they'll actually remember them. And they'll remember their name and their identity, and they will feel a loss of certain capabilities. So it's almost like you just lowered your IQ, and you might have a hard time performing a certain action, but you'll probably still think you have the same name, the same friends, so on and so forth. So it's almost like you diverge into two different futures, because at that point they're going to start experiencing different things, but they will both think that they are you. So that's what I anticipated. Now I actually found on the internet a paper which talks about what actually happens. So here we go. It says the following. Long-term observations showed that each disconnected hemisphere possesses not only a separate sensory motor interface with the environment, but its own perceptual, cognitive and linguistic repertoires, also a distinct personality, as well as characteristic preferences and dislikes. Thus, the two hemispheres have similar, but not identical, concepts of self, past and future, family, social custom, social culture, and history. And funnily enough, sometimes each hemisphere refers to the other one using its own name. So apparently the left hemisphere will sometimes say, oh, the right hemisphere was upset about what the left hemisphere said today, which I thought was quite interesting. So that's apparently what happens. You basically end up with two minds. Of course, if you went the reverse procedure and connect them together, I assume that they would quickly integrate into a single mind again. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about what is a brain. I'll see you then.